Here's the first simple truth. Most people, no matter how hard they work, no matter how many hours they do, no matter how many jobs they hold down, their income, year on year, will continue to decline. Scary, isn't it? Even depressing. But sadly, it's true. The fact is, year after year, people are making less money, and this pace of diminishing income is only accelerating. And it all started a long, long time ago. And here's why. Some time ago, half the population, the women, raised families, and the men went out to work. That was the normal state of affairs prior to the First and Second World Wars, and it was normal for the family to live on wages brought home by a single worker in the household. Of course, at this time, it was unfortunate that women were economically dependent on the men, and they therefore had a weaker standing in society. During World War I, as men were recruited as soldiers to go and fight, women picked up the slack back home on farms and factories. In Australia, 1 million women joined the workforce, and 2 million women replaced the men in farms and factories in Britain. Women were recruited for all sorts of jobs, from working in munitions factories to loading and offloading coal at the docks. And in Russia, over 20% more women went out to work. So practicality, rather than emancipation, opened the factory gates for women in what were originally men-only jobs. But here's the thing, women were paid much less than the men for the same jobs, and so women won a little, of course, but the factory owners won a lot because they were getting cheaper resources. In World War II, 350,000 American women joined the armed forces, and 5 million women joined the workforce. And in 1945, when the wars were over and there was no longer any need for cannon fodder, the soldiers returned home and they were looking for their old jobs back. But by then, women who'd gained financial independence by working in the factories back at home were reluctant to leave their jobs and fade back into the background. So what happened? Intense competition for the jobs at home meant that the bosses had more power to negotiate and lower wages. Of course, we should account for the few more jobs created because industry was diverting from bomb making to consumer goods, and now with double-income families, there was more of a demand. However, research by MIT tells us that the greater the number of female workers in the labor force not only reduces male wages, but also female wages. A 10% increase in female labor compared to male labor supply lowers male wages by 3 to 5%. But worse still, it lowers female wages by 7 to 8%. Here's the thing, our politicians, even our parents and teachers, drum into us that the harder we work, the bigger the rewards. The more we produce, the more we personally make. Well, that was certainly true between 1948 and 1973, when the average worker's output doubled and wages kept up with productivity. But then, after 1973, there was a shift. Individual productivity continued to go up, but wages stagnated and even declined. Between 1973 and 2013, worker output went up by 74%, but most of them saw very little reward for that effort. Most of the profits from that increased productivity went to the top of the corporate chain, leaving the remaining workers far behind. Between 1979 and 2013, the top 1% increased their income by 138%, while middle-income workers only saw a 6% rise in the money that they took home. However, the paycheck for the lowest wage workers sunk like a submarine below the surface, to 5% below 1979 levels. As if that were not enough, artificial intelligence, robotics, outsourcing and offshoring are all lowering wages further as the competition for the remaining jobs intensifies. Now let's continue where we left off. Even with lower wages, when you had more than one person working in a household after the war, families were still better off. Now here's the second simple truth, which may not be obvious. When you have more than one person in the household having to work, then it brings its own set of unique problems. Two-worker households are of course more dependent on time-saving devices such as washing machines and dryers to reduce household chores, and that bigger fridge and freezer to save on grocery runs. In addition to the purchase price of these items, they consume more water, more electricity, which all adds to the bills. Electricity bills in the US went up 60% between 1990 and 2018. With two people at work, there's of course the need for childcare and babysitters. Childcare spending amounts to 10% of the average family income. Two people need an additional car to go to work, and public transport doesn't always fit the bill, especially with the state of public transport at the moment. Now we are told that the second car is a luxury. Is it really? So right there's another expense. And of course, on top of the cost of the car, there are the gas bills, the repair bills, and the running costs. The cost of gas has more than doubled between 1996 and 2018. These additional costs pick away at the extra income that comes in because of more than one person working in the family. And with competition in the workplace being so high, people not only work longer hours, but they also bring work home. And so again, there's less time for domestic chores. People therefore resort to buying ready-made meals to save time, and they pay for gardeners and cleaners and so on, and these extra bills pick away at the additional take-home income. And here's another thing. To get ahead, people spend more time in education. It used to be that you could get a job that would allow you to make a decent living straight out of school. But now to compete, you have to go to university and get a degree. And today, a first degree is not enough. To compete with other people around you, now that everybody has a degree, you need a master's degree or even a PhD. And what does all that additional education time do? It delays your ability to earn an income, and it adds to your debt, which has to be paid off, and therefore extra bills for many, many more years. With higher education being valued so much, all these extra students wanting university places is driving prices up, and student debt has skyrocketed. And then, after these students have left university, they find that employers are offering less for their labor. Compared to 1998, by 2013, the buying power of the average graduate's salary fell by 5%. As usual, women fared worse with a drop of 6.5%. To make matters worse, these graduates found that fewer jobs offered healthcare. Whereas in 1989, 61% of graduates found that at least part of their healthcare was covered by their employers, by 2012, this had dropped by half to 31%, and dental care costs have doubled between 1996 and 2014. In general, increased healthcare bills snip away at the household income even further. Millions of Americans today just can't afford decent healthcare and have to do without. At the same time, double-income households were offered bigger mortgages, and so they borrowed more. And with borrowed money chasing houses, the average purchase price of a home went up. Between 1990 and 2019, the average home price went from $150,000 to $384,000. This of course resulted in bigger debt and bigger monthly repayments. So again, more of the monthly income was going into paying the mortgage. And that's a debt burden for 25 years or even longer. So over the years, the results of reduced wages and increased expenses has resulted in a host of problems for the average American. The balance between the non-discretionary expenses, which I call the have-to expenses, and the discretionary spending, which I call the choose-to spending, has changed dramatically. People, especially the poorest amongst us, are spending a lot more of their money on expenses they just can't avoid. This results in very little money left over for those choose-to items. The hardest hit in America are low-income households who spend 40% of their income on their mortgage or 50% on paying rent. In 2012, the poorest Americans spent 98% of their income on essential items and bills. This left them with just $367 a year or $1 a day to spend on anything else. Is it any wonder then that the average American finds it difficult to settle an unexpected bill of just $400? A car breakdown, a boiler failing, a trip to the dentist, and any money that they have left over the entire year is gone, and the situation is growing worse. The strain on what the lowest earners make and what they have to absolutely spend the money on has resulted in them sliding further and further into debt. US Federal Reserve data shows that 4 in 10 Americans would find it difficult to settle a $400 emergency bill, and 17% of Americans can't fully cover their monthly payments. And because they can't afford to, a quarter of Americans skipped medical care in 2018. It's no better across the Atlantic. In the UK, the average household wasn't coping much better. They spent more than they were earning, the worst record in 30 years. And why is that? According to the UK government's own Office of National Statistics, housing budgets are under increasing strain. Rising prices have led to increased spending in recent years, while disposable income has only modestly increased. But here's an added wrinkle mentioned in the report. The wealthiest 10% were 5 times richer than the average person, and therefore less likely to live beyond their means than the bottom 50% of households.